My mother-in-law slapped me hard and kicked me out of the car because I voted for Donald Trump on Election Day 2024. A staunch supporter of Kamala Harris, she had forced me to vote for her, but I refused. My husband stood by his mother, leaving me feeling betrayed. Determined to take control, I decided to unleash a powerful secret the very next day. I gave them a shocking surprise. My name is Emma, and I want to share my story. A journey filled with love, betrayal, and ultimately empowerment. I'm a 30-year-old English teacher, and my life was once a beautiful tapestry woven with dreams and hopes. I married Daniel, my husband, 2 years ago. He is 32 and works in the excise and tax department. At first, everything seemed perfect. Our love was strong, and our future looked bright. We had a lovely wedding surrounded by friends and family. Daniel was caring and attentive, and I felt like I was living in a fairy tale. We shared countless adventures, from weekend getaways to quiet nights spent reading together. But as time went on, that fairy tale began to fray at the edges, and the cracks in our relationship started to show. One of the biggest challenges in our marriage was Daniel's mother, Grace. At 58, she was a retired woman who had always been very controlling, and from the moment I entered their family, I felt her disapproval like a heavy cloud hanging over me. It started small, with little comments that seemed harmless but stung nonetheless. "You really should try to cook better, Emma," she'd say. "Daniel deserves a wife who can provide a good meal." It was as if she had appointed herself my judge and jury. I often tried to brush off her remarks, thinking that I could win her over eventually. After all, I loved Daniel, and I want his family to love me too. But every time I stepped into their home, I could feel Grace's piercing gaze and her judgmental silence. I was a stranger in my own home, constantly striving to meet her impossible standards. The tension escalated, and soon it became unbearable. Daniel was caught in the middle. I could see how much he cared for his mother and how desperately he wanted to please her. But it hurt me that he couldn't see how much his mother's words affected me. "She's just old-fashioned, Emma," he would say. "You have to give her time to warm up to you." I wanted to believe that, but I felt like a guest in my own marriage, waiting for permission to exist. The only person who truly understood my plight was my best friend, Sarah. She's also 30 and works as a lawyer. Sarah had always been my rock, providing support and a listening ear when I needed it most. "You deserve to be happy, Emma," she would say. "You can't let Grace control your life like this." I often confided in her about my frustrations, but it seemed like no matter how much I tried, things only got worse. As we approached the 2024 U.S. election, the tension in our household escalated to a new level. I was a staunch supporter of the Republican Party and had my hopes pinned on Donald Trump. Grace, on the other hand, was a devoted follower of the Democratic Party and wanted to see Kamala Harris win. It was like a storm brewing on the horizon, and I could feel the pressure building. "Emma, you have to vote for Kamala," Grace insisted one evening. "It's your duty as an American." I could feel my blood boiling. "But I support Trump," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "I believe in his policies." Grace's face turned a shade of crimson, and I knew I had crossed an invisible line. "Don't be ridiculous. You're supposed to be a part of this family. You should support what I support," she barked. Daniel sat silently, a deer caught in headlights, unwilling to take sides. I felt utterly alone, as if the very ground beneath me was crumbling away. How could I stand by and allow her to dictate my beliefs? Election Day, January 5th, 2024, arrived with a mix of excitement and dread. Daniel, Grace, and I piled into the car, tension thick in the air. As we drove to the polling station, I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. "Remember, Emma, you need to vote for Kamala," Grace reiterated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll vote for who I believe in," I replied defiantly, my heart racing. The silence that followed was suffocating, and I could feel Daniel shifting uncomfortably in his seat. After casting our votes, we headed back home. The air was electric with unspoken words. Suddenly, Grace turned to me, her voice laced with a false sweetness. "So, "Did you vote for Kamala?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. I hesitated, knowing the consequences of my answer. But I couldn't lie. "No, I voted for Trump," I said firmly. In that moment, I felt as if time stood still. The rage that erupted from Grace was like a tidal wave. "How dare you disobey me?" she shouted, her voice cutting through the silence. "You should be ashamed of yourself." I braced myself as her hand flew across my face in a sudden slap, the sting shocking me into silence. Daniel pulled the car over, panic rising in his eyes. "Mom, stop it," he pleaded, but Grace was beyond reason. "Get out of my car," she screamed, her eyes blazing with fury. My heart raced, and a mix of disbelief and humiliation washed over me as she kicked me out onto the roadside. Stranded and alone, I watched as Daniel hesitated, torn between the two of us. "I can't believe this is happening," I whispered to myself, feeling the weight of betrayal crash over me like a wave. I had to take control. I couldn't let this define me. I reached for my phone and called Sarah, my voice trembling as I explained what had just happened. "Stay there, I'm coming to get you," she said without hesitation. As I waited for her to arrive, I felt a fire igniting inside me, a need for revenge, a need to reclaim my life. Little did I know that this was only the beginning of my fight for freedom. As I stood by the roadside, my heart pounded in my chest. I felt a whirlwind of emotions swirling within me: anger, humiliation, and an overwhelming desire to break free from the grip of my mother-in-law, Grace. The shock of being thrown out of the car lingered, and I knew I could not let this moment pass without taking action. I looked down the road, hoping to catch a glimpse of Sarah's car, my heart racing with anticipation. When Sarah arrived, her expression was a mix of concern and fury. "Emma, what happened?" she asked, rushing toward me. I quickly recounted the entire ordeal, from the car ride to the shocking slap that left a stinging mark on my cheek. "I can't believe she did that," Sarah exclaimed, her voice filled with disbelief. "You have every right to be angry." As we drove away from that desolate spot, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. "What am I going to do?" I asked Sarah, my voice trembling. "I can't go back to that house. I can't keep living like this." Sarah nodded, her eyes focused on the road. "You need to take a stand, Emma. You deserve to be treated with respect. This isn't just about your mother-in-law. It's about your marriage and your happiness." I considered her words carefully. The idea of confronting Grace and Daniel terrified me, but the thought of continuing to live in fear and resentment was worse. "You're right," I said slowly, a spark of determination igniting within me. "I need to fight back. I need to show them that I won't be pushed around anymore." We decided to go to my apartment, a small sanctuary I had kept despite living with Daniel and Grace. It was my space, filled with my books and memories, and I felt a sense of safety as I stepped inside. "Let's take action," Sarah said, her voice resolute. "We need to document what happened." I nodded, remembering the sting of Grace's slap. "I'll go to the hospital and get a medical report," I replied, feeling a mixture of dread and determination. I wanted to hold Grace accountable for her actions, and I knew this was the first step. After a quick visit to the hospital, where I received a medical report confirming the physical assault, we headed to the police station. The gravity of what I was about to do weighed heavily on me. Would they take me seriously? Would Grace retaliate? But I steeled myself, remembering how powerless I felt just hours earlier. When we walked into the station, the officer at the desk looked up, his expression shifting from indifference to concern as I explained my situation. "I need to file a report against my mother-in-law for assault," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "She slapped me during an argument." The officer listened intently, taking notes as I spoke. I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me with each word. "We have medical evidence," Sarah interjected, holding up the report. "This needs to be taken seriously." The officer nodded, his demeanor changing as he recognized the seriousness of the situation. "We'll need to take your statement, and we can begin an investigation." After what felt like hours, I left the police station with a mix of relief and fear. I had taken the first step in reclaiming my power, but I knew there was a long road ahead. The next day, I received a call from the police informing me that Grace had been arrested and charged with physical assault and harassment. My heart raced at the news. It felt surreal to think that my mother-in-law was behind bars. That evening, I received a text from Daniel. "I'm sorry for everything, Emma. I want to talk. Please come home." My heart sank at the thought of returning to that house, to the very place that had become a battleground. I hesitated, but decided I needed to face him, to confront the man who had stood by while I was being mistreated. When I arrived, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Daniel was waiting in the living room, his expression a mix of concern and guilt. "Emma, I'm so sorry about what happened. I should have defended you," he began, his voice heavy with regret. I crossed my arms, feeling the weight of his apologies. "You should have, Daniel," I said, my voice firm. "You let her treat me like I'm nothing. I can't be in a marriage where I'm not respected or defended." He looked down, shame etched across his face. I thought it would blow over. I didn't know she would go that far. "Do you realize how this affects our relationship?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. "I feel betrayed. I thought we were a team." He looked up, desperation in his eyes. "I love you, Emma. I want to make this right." I wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at me. "You need to choose, Daniel. You need to stand up to your mother and support me." He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. "I will. I promise." But even as he spoke those words, I felt a pit in my stomach. How could I trust him again? How could I believe that he would finally choose me over Grace? The night wore on, and as we talked, I realized that our marriage had already been irrevocably changed. I had begun to see Daniel not just as my partner, but as a man caught in a web of familial loyalty, unable to break free. When I returned to my apartment that night, I felt a mixture of hope and despair. I was finally standing up for myself, but I knew the battle was far from over. I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for the future I wanted to reclaim. The next day, I made a decision that would change everything. I would file for divorce. I had to free myself from this toxic relationship and start anew. But as I sat on my couch, contemplating my next steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that Grace wouldn't take her arrest lying down. She would fight back, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. With the decision to file for divorce weighing heavily on my mind, I knew I had to prepare for the fallout. The morning after speaking with Daniel, I felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. I needed to meet with a lawyer, someone who could guide me through this process and help me reclaim my life. Sarah, ever supportive, offered to come with me. "You don't have to do this alone, Emma. I'll be right by your side," she assured me, her presence a comforting reminder that I wasn't fighting this battle in isolation. As we walked into the lawyer's office, I was struck by the stark reality of what I was about to undertake. I had never envisioned myself in this situation, facing a divorce. I never wanted it to come to this, I confessed to Sarah as we waited. "But I can't live like this anymore." She squeezed my hand, her encouragement bolstering my spirits. The lawyer, Ms. Johnson, greeted us with a warm smile and a firm handshake. "Let's get started," she said, motioning for us to take a seat. As I shared my story, the assault, the control, the betrayal, I could feel the weight lifting slightly. Ms. Johnson listened intently, taking notes and nodding empathetically. "You've done the right thing by seeking help, Emma. We'll make sure you're protected and can start anew." After discussing my options, we began drafting the divorce papers. It felt surreal, putting my name on a document that would sever ties with Daniel. I had hoped for a different outcome, for a marriage filled with love and respect, but the reality was stark. Grace's influence over our lives had turned our relationship into a battlefield, and I had to reclaim my identity. As I left the office, a sense of empowerment surged through me. I was taking control of my life. Yet, beneath that empowerment lay an undercurrent of fear. What would Grace do once she learned about the divorce? I could already imagine her fury. I knew I had to brace myself for the storm that was likely brewing. Later that evening, I received a call from the police. "Emma, we need to inform you that your mother-in-law has been released," the officer said. My heart raced.
What?
How is that possible? I stammered. She was arrested for assault. The officer explained that the charges had been reduced due to a lack of prior offenses. We're keeping an eye on her, but she's free to go. Panic surged through me. Grace would come after me. I felt vulnerable, exposed. What should I do? I asked the officer, my voice trembling. Just be cautious and document anything unusual. If she approaches you or harasses you, contact us immediately, he advised. That night, I barely slept, haunted by thoughts of Grace's wrath. I kept replaying the slap, the humiliation, and the moment she had kicked me out of the car. I had stood up for myself, but would it be enough? I decided to call Sarah and share my fears. I'm terrified, Sarah. What if she comes after me? I said, my voice shaky. You have every right to be scared, but you're stronger than you think, she replied firmly. We'll figure this out together. Days turned into weeks, and the tension was palpable. I moved forward with the divorce proceedings, and while I felt empowered, I also felt like I was walking on eggshells. Each time my phone buzzed, my heart raced, wondering if it would be a message from Daniel or, worse, from Grace. Finally, the day arrived when I had to meet Daniel to discuss the divorce. My stomach churned with anxiety. Would he support me, or would he fall back into his old patterns of placating his mother? As I drove to our meeting place, I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I had made my choice for a reason. When I saw him, his expression was a mixture of sadness and resolve. I'm glad we're talking, he said softly, avoiding my gaze. I know things have been difficult, but I want to find a way to fix this. I don't think we can fix this, Daniel, I replied, my voice steady. I need to do what's best for me, and that means moving on without you. He looked pained, but I knew deep down that this was the only way for me to reclaim my life. As we spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both standing on the edge of a cliff, uncertain of what lay below. The path forward was fraught with challenges, and I had no idea how Grace would react to the news of my divorce. But I was determined to face whatever came next, no matter the cost. As the days passed, the tension in my life seemed to escalate. I was deep in the divorce process, and with every document signed, I felt a mix of empowerment and anxiety. I knew Grace wouldn't take my decision lying down, and I had to prepare for the inevitable fallout. My heart raced whenever I received a notification on my phone, fearing it might be from her. One evening, while I was at home going over divorce papers, my phone rang. It was Sarah. Emma, you need to come over. Now, she said, urgency in her voice. What's wrong? I asked, my stomach dropping. It's Grace. I think she's been looking for you. My heart sank. Meet me at my place in 15 minutes, she instructed. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. What was Grace planning? I quickly gathered my things and drove to Sarah's apartment, my mind racing with possibilities. When I arrived, Sarah was pacing the living room, her brow furrowed with worry. I heard from one of my contacts that Grace has been asking around about you, she explained. She's furious about the divorce. I'm worried she might try to confront you. Just as Sarah finished speaking, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Daniel. I can't believe you're doing this, Emma. You're tearing our family apart. I felt my anger flare. He's still trying to defend her, I muttered, my fists clenching. He should be defending me. Sarah nodded sympathetically. You need to focus on your safety and well-being right now. Let's call the police and let them know about Grace's behavior. It was a proactive step, and I agreed. I was determined not to be a victim in this situation. We made the call, and after a brief discussion, the officer assured us they would increase patrols around my apartment. Just stay vigilant, he advised. I took a deep breath, grateful for the support, but the fear still lingered. That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning, imagining the worst. The next day, I decided to visit my therapist to talk through my fears and the anger I felt toward Grace. It's essential to express how you feel, my therapist advised. You've been through a lot, and it's okay to feel angry. I nodded, feeling the weight of my emotions. As I left the session, I felt a renewed sense of strength. I was determined not to let Grace control my life any longer. I would not be defined by her actions. I returned home, resolved to take back my power. Just when I thought I could breathe again, I received an unexpected visit. It was Daniel, standing at my door with an expression of desperation. "Emma, please let me explain," he pleaded. "I've realized how wrong I've been." "Where was this realization when your mother slapped me?" I shot back, my voice steady. "You should have defended me, Daniel. I can't trust you." He looked crushed, and part of me felt pity for him. "I want to make this right," he insisted. "I need to move on, Daniel. This is about my happiness now," I replied firmly. "You have to accept that." As he left, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. I was finally reclaiming my life. A few days later, I received a call from my lawyer. The divorce was finalized. I felt a rush of emotions, relief, freedom, and a sense of hope. But just when I thought I was free, Grace made her final move. She showed up at my apartment one afternoon, her face a mask of anger. "You think you can just walk away from my family?" she yelled, her voice echoing in the hallway. "You're nothing without us. Leave me alone, Grace." "You've done enough damage," I shouted back, my heart racing. But this time, I stood my ground. I had the police on my side, and I wasn't afraid of her anymore. In that moment, I realized the truth. I was stronger than I had ever believed. I had fought for my dignity, and I refused to let anyone take that away from me. I watched as Grace's anger morphed into confusion, and for the first time, I felt a sense of victory. As she turned and walked away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had survived the storm, and now I was ready to embrace the future, my future. I would move forward with my life, focusing on my career, my friendships, and rediscovering who I was outside of my marriage. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild my life. I poured my energy into teaching, finding joy in my students and the lessons I shared. I reconnected with Sarah, and our friendship deepened as we supported each other through life's challenges. Most importantly, I learned to love myself again. The journey had been painful, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever came next. I had broken free from the chains of a toxic relationship, and as I looked ahead, I felt a sense of hope and excitement for the life that awaited me. I had chosen my path, and now I was determined to walk it with confidence and grace.